I just sold your old man's pathetic shack." My stepfather's voice oozed through the line, greasy and half-drunk. "Use the cash to clear my tabs and take Emily to Hawaii. As for those dusty military medals of his, tossed 'em right in the trash." My blood turned to ice, but the real blade didn't come from him. It came from my own mother snatching the receiver away. "Why do you always have to be so rigid, Sarah? You're in the army. What do you even need a house for? What's wrong with sacrificing a little for this family?" They thought this uniform and thousands of miles made me a helpless idiot sitting here chewing on my own teeth. She used my devotion as a shield for their daylight robbery. But they didn't know that 10 years ago I planted a legal minefield, and they just stepped right on the pressure plate. Before I tell you how they paid for it, take a second to like and subscribe. Only if this hits home for you, though. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. The line went dead. A flat mechanical drone echoed in my ear. Beep, beep, beep. The El Paso sun hammered down on Fort Bliss, turning the forward operating base into an absolute oven. 98 degrees in the shade, if you could find any. The dusty air smelled heavily of diesel exhaust, stale sweat, and burnt copper. I lowered the phone slowly. I didn't smash it against the gravel. I didn't scream. That is exactly what Robert wanted. He wanted a reaction. He wanted a hysterical girl he could laugh at while sipping a cheap beer. Around me, the base moved at full throttle. Soldiers dragged heavy olive-drab ammo crates across the dirt. A pair of Humvees rumbled past their massive tires, kicking up grimy yellow clouds that choked the air. I stood completely frozen in the middle of the noise. Sacrifice. That single word from my mother's mouth felt like a handful of broken glass jammed down my throat. She didn't call to ask if I survived the last field rotation. She called to tell me they robbed me. They took the only piece of my father I had left and traded it for a tan on a beach. My hands curled into tight, hard knots. My knuckles turned stark white, pressing so hard into the rim of a rusted 55-gallon steel drum that the jagged metal bit straight into my palms. I welcomed the pain. It kept the rage steady. It kept it cold. I turned on my heel and walked toward the makeshift latrines. Every step was deliberate. Heavy tactical boots crunched against the desert gravel. Pacing out the anger, left, right, left. I shoved the warping plywood door open. Inside, the heat was suffocating, trapped under a corrugated tin roof that rattled violently every time the Texas wind whipped across the flats. I stood directly in front of a scratched, dented stainless steel mirror. The reflection looking back looked rough. Desert dust caked the hard lines around my mouth. Sunburn flaked across my nose, but there were no tears, not a single drop. I cranked the old brass faucet. The water came out straight from the deep well, ice cold and smelling slightly of sulfur. I scooped it up in my calloused palms and tatted it against my face. Hard. Once. Twice. The shock cleared the fog. I grabbed a rough brown paper towel, wiped away the Texas mud, and used both hands to smooth down the collar of my camouflage uniform. When I looked up into that metal mirror again, the blindsided daughter was gone. The girl who wished her mother loved her was buried under the sand. My eyes went flat. Sharp. The exact same expression I used when analyzing satellite imagery to track cartel drug routes across the Rio Grande. I had a target. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds and pulled up the grid coordinates of home. Colorado. To Robert, that plot of land in the Rocky Mountains was just a line on a ledger. A piece of real estate he could flip to cover his gambling debts. A dusty shack. That is what the parasite called it. But to me, that cabin was everything. It was the smell of fresh cedar shavings on a crisp October morning. It was the sound of my father's heavy flannel shirt scraping against the workbench as he taught me how to sand down pine planks until they felt like silk. He built every square inch of that place with his bare, calloused hands. Robert wanted to bleed my father's ghost dry. He wanted to turn my dad's sweat into cheap, sugary cocktails on a resort beach, while Emily posted filtered selfies for a bunch of strangers on the internet. I unbuckled the heavy utility belt around my waist and let it drop onto the wooden bench. The weight lifted from my hips, but my chest tightened. The battlefield wasn't thousands of miles away across some foreign border. The threat wasn't an insurgent with an AK-47. The enemy was sitting right on my father's leather recliner, wearing a cheap suit and drinking my dad's whiskey. I kicked the door open and marched straight across the compound to the Tactical Operations Center. The air conditioning inside the server room blasted me with freezing artificial air. It smelled like ozone and hot plastic. I ignored the flashing green lights on the comms rack. I ignored the classified situational reports piling up on my desk. I sat down at my workstation, flipped open the ruggedized, encrypted laptop, and logged into my private secure channel. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. A rapid-fire clatter echoed in the small, quiet room. Click, click, click. Message priority urgent. To Hayes Rachel, Denver Legal Partners. Subject, Citadel Condition. Read. I didn't waste time on a greeting. I didn't write a long emotional essay about how much my heart hurt. This was an operation. I kept it to one single devastating line. They sold the house. Trigger the minefield. I held my breath for half a beat. My right thumb hovered over the heavy black enter key. This was the point of no return. Once this packet left the base servers, the machine would start grinding, and it wouldn't stop until someone went to federal prison. I slammed my thumb down. The key clicked with a heavy metallic finality. On the screen, a small green progress bar filled up and vanished. Message sent successfully. 10 years of waiting. 10 years of keeping my mouth shut while they picked at my bones. The counteroffensive was officially live. The heavy click of the keyboard faded. The hum of the Texas server room dissolved into a different kind of noise. A ghost from 10 years ago. The clinking of silverware against expensive porcelain. Thanksgiving night, Colorado. I was 18 years old. I sat at the far end of the dining table. My posture was straight shoulders, squared hands resting flat on my lap. The air inside the house felt thick, suffocating under the smell of roasted meat, heavy gravy, and Robert's cheap drugstore cologne. I stared at the thick cardstock envelope resting next to my water glass. The official seal of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Admission granted. A full ride. Blood, sweat, and absolute discipline packed into a single piece of paper. Robert sat at the head of the table, the master of a house he did not build. He sloshed a heavy crystal glass of Woodford Reserve in his hand. Premium bourbon. He did not pay for it. My mother's nursing paycheck paid for it, earned through brutal 12-hour graveyard shifts. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. He stood up slowly, a smug, oily smile spreading across his flushed face. He tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The room went quiet. A toast. Robert announced, his voice slurred just enough to show he was 3 drinks deep. He pointed the amber liquid at me. To Sarah, wasting a premium top-tier education just to learn how to take orders and wipe down guns. A sharp, ugly laugh escaped Emily's mouth. She was 16, sitting across from me, playing with her manicured nails. I did not react. I did not blink. I looked directly at my mother. She sat on Robert's right. She was the one who was supposed to stand up. She was the one who was supposed to say, "That is enough." She kept her head down. She picked up her steak knife. She pressed the jagged metal edge into a cold slab of turkey meat. The screech of the blade against the plate echoed in the silent dining room. She cut her meat. She chewed. She swallowed. She did not choke on the betrayal. Her silence was a death sentence. It was absolute complicity. She chose her comfortable life. Her bills paid her husband's temper, managed over her own daughter. Now for the fun part, Robert said, slamming his empty glass down. Gift time. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small square box. The color hit my eyes like a flashbang. Robin's Egg Blue. The signature velvet of Tiffany and Company. Emily gasped. She slammed her hands on the table, completely ignoring her spilled water glass. Robert popped the box open, revealing a delicate silver chain with a heavy pendant that caught the chandelier light. He walked over, draped it around Emily's neck, and clasped it. He patted her shoulder. He looked down at her with the immense, overflowing pride of a real father. The perfect American family picture. I sat perfectly still. My breathing remained even. I waited. A simple nod, a handshake, a single word of recognition for grinding my bones into dust to earn that West Point crest. Robert walked back to his seat. He reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a plain white paper envelope. He tossed it casually across the varnished wood. It slid and stopped inches from my plate. It was completely flat. It weighed absolutely nothing. I reached out. My calloused fingers flipped the unsealed flap. Inside sat a single wrinkled $50 bill. "Go buy yourself some thick socks," Robert said, sitting down and pouring another 3 fingers of bourbon. He did not even look at me. "New York winters get brutal. Try not to freeze out there, tin soldier." $50, a crumpled piece of paper, that was my exact value in this house. I stood up. The wooden chair scraped harshly against the floorboards. I did not throw the money back. I did not scream. I turned and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I shut the solid wood door behind me. 2 minutes later, the brass doorknob turned. My mother slipped inside, closing the door quickly behind her like a thief. She did not walk over to hug me. She stood by the light switch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He is just joking, Sarah," she whispered, her voice tight with annoyance. "Stop being so sensitive. You are ruining the dinner. Just keep the peace." Keep the peace. I looked right through her. I grabbed my heavy jacket, brushed past her shoulder, and walked out the back door. The Colorado winter air hit my face like a solid sheet of ice. The temperature was dropping fast, biting through my thin shirt. I stood on the back porch, staring out into the pitch-black tree line. A bright orange spark flared in the darkness near the edge of the deck. Sarge O'Connor. My father's old squad mate. He stood in the freezing shadows, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He wore a heavy surplus jacket smelling of stale tobacco and gun oil. He did not offer any empty pity. Pity was for the weak. He took a long drag, exhaled a thick cloud of white smoke, and walked up the wooden steps. He reached into his deep pocket and shoved something hard against my chest. I took it. A small, heavy book. The leather binding was cracked, worn smooth from years of handling. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. "Do not let the rats chew through your walls, kid," Sarge grunted. His voice was like gravel grinding under a boot. He turned around and walked away into the snow, leaving me alone in the freezing dark. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, if you know exactly how it feels to watch someone else get the gold while you get the scraps, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Just right. I built my own walls. Let me know I am not the only one who had to survive this. The memory shattered. The freezing Colorado snow melted away, replaced instantly by the suffocating Texas heat inside the Tactical Operations Center. I was back in El Paso. I stared at the encrypted screen of my laptop. I reached my hand down under my canvas army cot. My fingers brushed against the floor, finding the rough, familiar texture of cracked leather. I pulled the small book out and set it on the metal desk. The spine was falling apart, but the pages were intact. My walls never fell. They only got stronger. Suddenly, the secure phone on my desk lit up. A sharp red light blinking in the quiet room. An incoming call from Denver. Rachel. I picked up the receiver. 0600 hours. The encrypted desk phone screamed, a sharp grating ring that cut right through the low hum of the server room's AC unit. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver before the second ring even finished. "Speak." I pulled the Iron Covenant out of the safe. A voice rasped on the other end. Rachel Hayes, a corporate pit bull in Denver who treated black coffee and Marlboro Reds as a balanced breakfast. I could hear the metallic click of her Zippo lighter through the speaker, followed by a long, heavy exhale of smoke. "Read it to me, word for word." Thick paper shuffled, rough, aggressive sounds of pages being flipped. "Tenants in common, Section 4, Paragraph 2. Any transfer of deed sale or lien on the property requires the physical in-person presence and the wet signature of both listed parties in front of a state-licensed notary public." She took another drag. The cherry of the cigarette crackled over the line. "Robert's little real estate contract." Rachel let out a dry, hacking laugh that sounded like sandpaper rubbing together. "Right now it is only good for wiping his ass. It is legally dead on arrival." I did not smile. The muscles in my jaw stayed locked hard. "I need target intel." "Give it to me," Rachel said. The sound of a heavy pen clicking open. "The realtor, the mortgage lender, the buyer." I want full names. I want firm business addresses. I need to know if they are active accomplices running a title scam or just complete incompetent idiots who did not run a basic public records search before writing a check. Scribbling over the line. Fast, hard strokes against a legal pad. I am drafting the cease and desist right now. Rachel said, her tone shifting from casual to predatory. I am going to carpet bomb the broker's office with threats of a multi-million-dollar fraud suit. We will freeze the buyer's escrow account before a single red cent clears the bank. They want to play dirty. I will bury them in so much paperwork, they will need a shovel to breathe. Do it. When this greasy bastard is on his knees begging, Rachel said, her voice dropping an octave into a low growl. I am cracking open my Macallan 18-year. You want a glass? Keep it on ice. I slammed the receiver down. Hard. I punched in a second number, an unlisted landline sitting in a dirty, oil-stained garage 3 states away. It rang 4 times. A gruff, heavy grunt answered. Yeah. Sarge, it is Sarah. Kid. The gravel in his voice immediately shifted. The casual tone vanished. What is the situation? Robert sold the cabin. Dead silence, then a massive, violent crack. The sound of a heavy fist smashing down on a solid wooden workbench. Wrenches and sockets rattled wildly in the background. That son of a bitch, Sarge growled. He did not ask for context. He did not ask to hear my mother's side of the story. True loyalty does not ask for permission or play the middle ground. You need character witnesses. You need a physical presence to protect Frank's dying wish. Say the word. I might need boots on the ground. I will drag a whole squad of combat vets down there. Sarge fired back, his voice thick with absolute conviction. We will form a perimeter. We will block the damn driveway. Let that bastard try to move us. A strange heat spread through the center of my chest. It pushed back the freezing cold isolation of the betrayal. Blood was supposed to be thicker than water. But my own blood had sold me out for a cheap plane ticket to Hawaii. The military brotherhood. It was standing right beside me, ready to load magazines and hold the line. Stand by, Sarge. I am moving out. I walked straight out of the operations center and into the commanding officer's office. Emergency leave, no explanations. Granted in exactly 3 minutes. I did not go back to the barracks. I did not hit the showers. I did not take off the desert camouflage uniform. The fabric was stiff, crusted with dried sweat, fine Texas dust, and the sharp smell of gun cleaner. I wanted to bring the absolute filth and harshness of the battlefield right into their clean, stolen living room. Let them smell what real sacrifice was. I grabbed my heavy olive drab canvas duffel bag. I dragged it out to the dirt parking lot where my beat-up Jeep Wrangler sat baking in the brutal morning sun. I threw the bag into the back. It hit the metal floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. I grabbed the rear tailgate and slammed it shut. The heavy metal latch clicked with a violent final snap that echoed across the empty lot. I climbed into the driver's seat. The black vinyl burned right through my cargo pants. I jammed the metal key into the ignition. The engine roared, spitting a cloud of dark exhaust out the tailpipe. I threw the heavy shifter into gear and stomped my boot down on the gas pedal. Thick rubber tires tore against the hot, cracked asphalt. 12 hours. That was the drive time from the blistering sandy edge of El Paso to the thin, freezing air of Colorado. 12 hours of straight highway, cheap gas station, black coffee, and pure, unfiltered rage. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, staring at the dashed white lines flashing past the dirty windshield. Robert wanted to act like a predator. He was about to find out what it felt like to be hunted. Colorado Springs. The rented apartment smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and old dust. I kicked the front door shut behind me. I did not head for the shower. I did not strip off the combat uniform. The West Texas desert was still baked into the heavy fabric. Fine, gritty yellow sand fell from the deep treads of my tactical boots, dusting the spotless, polished hardwood floor. I wanted the dirt there. I wanted the harsh reality of my life, staining this clean, quiet room. I unslung my heavy canvas duffel bag. I let it drop. It hit the floorboards with a dead, hollow thud. I walked to the exact center of the living room. I planted my boots shoulder-width apart. I crossed my arms tight over my chest, locking my hands under my biceps. My spine was a steel rod. I became a piece of the furniture, a static object. I waited. 12 minutes later, the brass deadbolt clicked loudly. The hinges whined. Robert walked in. He was twirling a brass key ring around his thick index finger, whistling some off-key tune. He wore a cheap polyester suit jacket over a wrinkled, sweat-stained dress shirt. As soon as he stepped inside, the overwhelming stench of bargain bin aftershave and stale barroom beer flooded the confined space. He looked up and saw me. He flashed that familiar, arrogant, greasy smirk. He had his speech ready. The same gaslighting garbage he always used to crush any resistance in our house. He fully expected to walk into this room and find a scared, emotional little girl. He did not notice that the oxygen in the room had already been sucked dry. He started talking before the door even closed behind him. The words spilled out of his mouth in a chaotic, defensive mess. He played the ultimate victim. The housing market was terrible. The economy was rigged. The credit card companies were bleeding him dry. My mother was sick with worry over the mounting bills. Then came the pivot. The aggressive attack. He pointed a thick, yellowed fingernail at my face. He called me a selfish brat. An ungrateful, rigid kid who ran away to play war games in the dirt while the real adults handled the heavy burdens of the family. I did not shift my weight. I did not blink. I kept my breathing slow, deliberate, and entirely controlled. 2 seconds in, 2 seconds out. I let the silence hang in the air between us. I let it stretch until it became a physical weight pressing down on his chest. His loud, booming rant began to lose its rhythm. He stuttered. He shifted his weight nervously from his left foot to his right. His eyes darted toward the window, then to the kitchen counter, then back to my face. He swallowed hard. The dry clicking sound of his throat was loud in the dead room. His arrogant smirk twitched, cracked, and completely collapsed. When he finally ran out of breath, the heavy silence dragged on for another agonizing 10 seconds. He was drowning in it. Then I finally spoke. My voice was completely flat. The volume was low, forcing him to strain to hear me. I do not play children's games, Robert. I serve this country. You are committing felony property theft. Do not confuse the two. The blood rushed violently to his face. His thick neck turned an ugly mottled red above his tight collar. The veins bulged. I have a legal contract, you arrogant little bitch. He spat, stepping forward, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. I am the head of this family. The paperwork is signed. The money is moving. It is done. I did not argue with him. Arguing was a courtesy reserved for equals. I reached out with my left hand. My ruggedized military-grade laptop sat open on the kitchen island behind me. I spun the bright screen to face him. My index finger tapped the spacebar. A harsh, compressed audio file cracked through the heavy laptop speakers. Rachel's voice, sharp, relentless, dripping with legal venom. She was backing the Denver real estate broker into a corner, tearing apart his flimsy defense. Then the broker's voice echoed through the room, high-pitched, shaking, and utterly panicked. Mr. Vance swore he was the sole owner. He signed the legal affidavit. We had no idea the stepdaughter was on the original deed. He told us she gave up her rights. He lied to us. I hit the spacebar again. The audio cut off instantly. The sudden absolute silence in the room was deafening. Robert stood frozen. The ugly red color drained completely out of his face in a matter of seconds, leaving behind a sickly, pale gray pallor. The mask of the powerful, untouchable patriarch shattered into a million pieces on the hardwood floor. He took a clumsy, stumbling step backward. He looked exactly like a cornered street rat. He raised his hands, shaking slightly. Stripped of his power, he went for the lowest possible blow. You do this. You drag me into a courtroom. You will break your mother's heart. It will kill her, Sarah. I dropped my arms from my chest. I took one single, heavy step forward. The physical gap between us vanished. I was close enough to smell the sour, nervous sweat soaking into his cheap collar. He flinched instinctively, leaning back, pulling his chin away from me. My mother's heart broke a long time ago, I said, locking my eyes onto his wide, panicked pupils. You are just the guy holding the hammer. He opened his mouth to speak. No sound came out. His jaw just worked up and down uselessly. You have exactly two choices. I told him, my tone matching the freezing, biting Colorado wind howling outside the window. Choice 1. You pick up your phone right now. You call the broker. You cancel the transaction. You eat the legal penalties, and you clean up your own garbage. I paused for 3 full seconds, letting the brutal reality of his failure sink into his thick skull. Choice 2. At exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the district attorney receives the certified package. It contains the audio file, the fraudulent contract, and a formal criminal complaint for felony wire fraud. You will do federal time. They do not serve cheap bourbon in federal prison. I raised my right hand. I pointed a single steady finger toward the front door. Meeting adjourned. Get out of my house. Robert stared at me. He tried to muster a final look of defiance, trying to salvage 1 ounce of his broken pride, but his shoulders slumped in defeat. The cheap suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. He turned around, his head bowed, and shuffled out into the hallway like a beaten, pathetic stray dog. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. I stood alone in the quiet room. I looked up at the wall. The red LED numbers on the digital clock glowed brightly in the dim light. 2100. The 12-hour countdown had officially started. The red digital numbers on the wall clock flipped. 9 o'clock. The apartment was completely silent. Only the low hum of the refrigerator broke the quiet. My phone sat face up on the scratched kitchen counter. The screen remained black. No incoming call, no desperate apology. Robert chose to play a game of chicken. He was calling my bluff. He actually believed I would fold to protect the family image. 0901. I picked up the phone and sent 1 text to Denver. Execute. Rachel did not wait. A heavily drafted cease and desist order launched from her outbox directly to the real estate broker. It carried the immediate threat of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. A certified digital copy went straight to the buyer's mortgage lender. The escrow account locked down instantly. Robert's financial machine choked and died. The money was frozen. When you cut off a parasite's food supply, it panics. It gets desperate, and then it plays dirty. 20 minutes later, the kitchen counter began to vibrate. A hard, violent buzzing sound. My phone danced across the laminate surface. It did not stop. A constant, relentless rattle. I picked it up. The harsh light from the screen cut into my eyes. Notifications. Dozens of them flooding the lock screen. Facebook. Emily. My sweet, innocent 16-year-old stepsister. She posted a massive wall of text. A perfectly engineered, tear-jerking tragedy designed for maximum internet sympathy. She attached a heavily filtered photograph of Robert, my mother, and herself smiling on a sunny porch. A fake plastic family. The post was a masterclass in manipulation. She painted Robert as a broken, hard-working father, carrying the heavy burden of crushing debt to keep a roof over their heads. She painted me as a cold-blooded, robotic soldier. She wrote that I would rather watch my own family starve in the gutter than allow them to sell a rotting shack in the woods. She ended it with praying hands emojis. The comments rolled in like an avalanche. The flying monkeys arrived on cue. People I had not spoken to in a decade. Judgmental neighbors, distant aunts, people sitting safely in their soft, air-conditioned living rooms, typing out their moral outrage. How can you do this to the people who raised you? You are a total disgrace, a complete stain on the uniform. They sat on their comfortable couches and judged a soldier currently spending her days baking in the West Texas sun, securing the exact borders they slept safely behind. My jaw locked tight. The muscles in my neck strained against the collar of my shirt. I did not blink. I scrolled down the screen with my thumb. Then the scrolling stopped. The deepest, most poisonous knife was buried right in the middle of the comment section. Carol, my own mother. She did not correct the lies. She did not defend her daughter against the mob. She typed 1 single pathetic sentence. I just wish you 2 sisters could get along. Absolute, pure cowardice. She took a calculated felony fraud committed by her husband and disguised it as a petty, childish squabble. She threw me straight under the bus just to keep her false peace intact. I did not type a furious reply. I did not engage the mob. I pressed the hard button on the side of the phone. The screen went completely black, cutting off the toxic noise. I walked over to my green duffel bag. I unzipped the side pocket and pulled out my father's old heavy leather Bible. It smelled like dry paper and old tobacco. I flipped it open, running my calloused index finger down the worn page until I found the book of Ephesians. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. I closed the book. I let the heavy leather cover snap shut. I did not need to fight a fake war in a comments section. I was already fighting a real one. Back in Denver, Rachel was watching the entire circus unfold. The sharp, hollow click of her computer mouse echoed in her office. She took high-resolution screenshots of Emily's entire crying post. She captured every single nasty comment. She bundled the digital files into a clean professional email. She sent it directly to the people trying to buy the cabin. Her message was brief and lethal. This is the true character of the people selling you this property. They are actively lying on the internet to cover up a fraudulent real estate transaction. Proceed at your own extreme legal risk. The impact hit like a sledgehammer. The buyers panicked. Nobody wants to sink their life savings into a property tied up in a vicious family war and a federal crime. They pulled their cash offer immediately. The real estate broker realized he was holding a live grenade. To save his own real estate license, he flipped fast. He pointed the finger straight at Robert, immediately forwarding Rachel the emails where Robert explicitly lied about owning the title. The civil dispute was over. It officially upgraded to a felony. Robert was completely stripped of his cash out. He was stripped of his fake house sale. He was publicly exposed to the broker and the bank. All of his exits were permanently sealed shut. He had absolutely nothing left to lose. And when you push a rabid, desperate dog into a dead end, it does not surrender. It bares its teeth. It bites. 2 a.m, the apartment was pitch black. Boom, boom, boom. The heavy oak front door shuddered violently against its hinges. The deadbolt rattled hard in the metal strike plate. Dust rained down from the upper door frame. "Open the damn door, you little bitch," Robert roared from the hallway. His voice was thick, wet, and reeked of stale draft beer and sour whiskey. The smell was so strong it practically seeped underneath the door sweep. "You think you're so untouchable. You think you're better than me." I stood exactly 2 meters away from the vibrating door. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet. I did not reach for a weapon. I did not turn on the overhead lights. My breathing remained perfectly even. 2 seconds in, 2 seconds out. I was conducting a standard military threat assessment. Physical threat present. Subject is intoxicated, highly agitated, and experiencing a total loss of financial control. A classic extinction burst. I did not need to engage. I didn't even need to raise my voice. The guy in apartment 4B, Mark, a retired city firefighter with zero tolerance for midnight domestic disputes, had already dialed 911. Boom, boom. "I'll break this door off the hinges." Robert screamed, his heavy dress shoes kicking the lower wood panel. He never got the chance. 5 minutes later, the dark living room was suddenly washed in harsh, strobing light. Red and blue flashes cut violently through the cheap horizontal window, blinds painting my stoic face in alternating neon colors. Tires screeched to a halt in the gravel lot outside. Heavy tactical boots pounded up the exterior concrete stairs. Colorado Springs police step away from the door. A deep voice barked. I stayed perfectly still in the dark. I listened. Robert was completely blinded by his own frantic rage. He spun around. He didn't see 2 armed police officers. He just saw someone challenging his crumbling authority. "Mind your own damn business." Robert slurred, his voice cracking under the pressure. "This is a family matter. I'm the head of this house. Sir, back up and put your hands behind your back." "Don't tell me what to do, Badge," Robert yelled. Then he made the ultimate fatal mistake. Through the thin drywall, I heard the scuffle. Robert shoved forward and jammed a thick, drunken finger directly into the chest of the lead patrol officer. A hard, heavy thud shook the floorboards. The sound of a 200-pound man getting violently body slammed onto the cold concrete walkway. "Stop resisting. Give me your hands." A sharp grunt. The squeak of rubber soles scuffing against concrete, and then the sweetest sound in the world. The cold metallic ratcheting click, click, click of Smith & Wesson steel handcuffs biting down hard on Robert's wrists. You're making a mistake. My wife is sick. That ungrateful brat inside is stealing from me. Robert shrieked, his voice muffled against the dirty ground. They dragged him down the concrete stairs by his arms. I walked slowly to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open exactly 2 inches. I crossed my arms and stood in the shadows. I watched the 2 officers shove him roughly into the back of the patrol cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut. The nightmare was over. I didn't put him in a cage. He put himself there. The cruiser pulled away, swallowing him into the night. 7 o'clock the next morning. The sun was up. The coffee was black and bitter. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before I hit answer. Sarah. Carol sobbed hysterically into the receiver. They denied his bail. He's in county lockup. The lawyer wants $5,000 just to show up. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I waited. I waited for the one question a real mother would ask. Did he hurt you? Are you safe? Were you terrified? The question never came. You have to drop the lawsuit, Sarah. She begged, her voice frantic, completely ignoring the fact that her husband tried to break down my door in the middle of the night. Please, we will lose everything. Don't do this to us. She only cared about the money. She only cared about saving face for her miserable husband. Her daughter's safety didn't even cross her mind. My grip on the ceramic mug tightened until my knuckles popped. The last pathetic thread holding me to this woman snapped permanently. I didn't put him in that cell, I said. My voice was colder than a frozen lake. He made his choice. Now I am making mine. Fido, Sarah, please, I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I didn't just hang up on a phone call. I hung up on a lifetime of being second best. If you have ever picked up the phone hoping your parent would finally care about you, only to realize they just wanted to use you to fix their own mess. I know exactly how that feels. Do me a favor right now. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below saying, I choose me. Let's show each other that we don't need their validation to survive. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone rang again. It wasn't my mother. Captain Mason. Detective Brooks's low, gravelly voice came through the speaker. The DA reviewed the wire fraud evidence and the assault on a police officer. We are officially upgrading the charges to a Class 3 felony. Understood, Detective. There's a preliminary mediation hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. They are going to try to settle the civil suit before the criminal hammer drops. I looked out the window at the distant, jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The hunt was officially over. Now it was time to step into the mediation room and dissect the prey. 24 hours before the mediation hearing. I stood in the kitchen drinking black coffee that tasted like battery acid. The deep rattling rumble of an old Ford V8 engine cut through the quiet neighborhood street. Heavy, uneven tires crunched over the gravel driveway outside. I walked to the window. Sarge O'Connor cut the ignition. The truck gave one final violent shudder before dying. He climbed out of the rusted cab, walked around to the truck bed, and hauled out a heavy olive-drab military footlocker. The metal corners were badly chipped and rusted deep red. He carried it up the front concrete steps. I opened the front door. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was holding up. He walked right past me and dropped the heavy steel trunk directly onto the hardwood floor of the living room. Bang! The sound vibrated violently up through the thick rubber soles of my boots. He stood up straight, wiping dark motor grease off his calloused hands onto his worn denim jeans. Your father, Frank, gave me this right before his last deployment. Sarge grunted. His voice was thick, ruined by decades of cheap cigars and desert dust. His exact orders were clear. Only open it when the kid really needs it. He reached out and patted my shoulder once, a heavy solid weight, a silent transfer of duty. Then he turned around, walked down the steps, and drove away. The front door clicked shut. I stood completely alone in the room, staring down at the faded green paint of the footlocker. I dropped to one knee. The floor was cold. My fingers found the heavy brass latches. They were stiff from a decade of disuse. I pushed down hard with the heels of my hands. Snap! Snap! I threw the heavy metal lid back. The The smell hit me instantly, completely bypassing my brain and punching me straight in the center of my chest. Fresh cedar sawdust. Hops number 9 gun oil. Old leather. It smelled exactly like my father. I did not touch the meticulously folded triangular flag. I did not touch the heavy bronze medals resting in their faded velvet cases. My eyes locked onto a thick brown craft paper envelope tucked into the bottom corner. It was sealed shut with a thick puddle of dark red wax. I picked it up. It felt heavy, important. I pressed my thumb against the center of the seal and pushed. The brittle red wax cracked and splintered, falling onto the floorboards like drops of dried blood. I pulled out a stack of documents. On top was a single handwritten letter. The cursive ink was sharp, leaning heavily to the right. Frank Mason's handwriting. He wrote about the cabin in the mountains. He wrote about the long hours spent sanding the pine floorboards, cutting the heavy timber, building the stone fireplace by hand. He called it the Citadel of Peace, a fortress meant to keep the wolves out. The final paragraph was not an emotional, tearful goodbye. My father was a military man. He did not leave his assets to chance. The black ink pressed deep into the paper, forming a steel hinge that locked my entire life into place. To ensure no one ever strips this place away from you, I established a special legal clause. Carol only retains a life estate. She has the right to occupy the property until she passes. Nothing more. She's strictly forbidden from selling, transferring, or borrowing against the title. Absolute, unquestionable ownership belongs to you, Sarah. My chest tightened. My breathing stopped completely. This was not just a dying wish. This was a legal mandate. It was undeniable, ironclad proof of deliberate will concealment, an organized, premeditated felony fraud committed by my own mother and her parasitic husband. For 10 years, they hid this document. For 10 years, my mother sat at that dining table, playing the victim, begging me to keep the peace while she actively conspired to rob her own flesh and blood. My dead father was still standing guard over me from the grave, while the woman who gave birth to me was selling me out to fund a Hawaiian vacation. The shock vanished. The cold mechanical focus of a military intelligence officer returned. I walked over to my tactical gear bag. I pulled out my secure laptop and a portable document scanner. I fed the thick papers into the machine. Whirr! Click. The digital files transferred to my encrypted drive. I picked up my phone and dialed Denver. Rachel picked up on the first ring. Check your secure inbox, I ordered. I listened to the line. I heard the faint click of her computer mouse. Then 10 full seconds of dead silence. Rachel Hayes did not easily lose her words. When she finally spoke, the trademark sarcasm was completely gone. Her voice was ice cold and deadly serious. Sarah, this is not a smoking gun. This is a nuclear bomb. I stared down at the broken red wax on the floor. Weaponize it. I am drafting a subpoena right now. Rachel fired back, the sound of her fingers already hammering aggressively across her mechanical keyboard. I am having a process server hit his old law firm today to pull the certified original document. We have the absolute paper trail. Robert Vance just got sealed inside a concrete box. All of his exits are concreted shut. Hold the line until tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I looked out the living room window at the setting sun dipping behind the jagged mountains. The board was completely set. The pieces were locked in place. Tomorrow morning at the negotiation table, the bomb goes off. The conference room inside the district attorney's office felt like a meat locker. The industrial HVAC system pumped freezing air through the ceiling vents, humming with a low mechanical drone that vibrated deep in the floorboards. I sat perfectly still on my side of the heavy oak table. My boots were planted flat on the carpet. My right hand rested deep inside the pocket of my jacket. My fingers traced the folded, rough edge of my father's letter. I did not tap my foot. I did not blink. I was a statue. Across the wide table sat the enemy. Robert wore a slightly better suit today, trying desperately to play the part of the misunderstood, hard-working family man. Beside him sat my mother, Carol. Her shoulders hunched forward. She kept her eyes glued to the wood grain of the table, too cowardly to look at me. Next to Robert sat his expensive defense attorney, a slick guy with a bad comb-over and a gold watch. At the head of the table sat Assistant District Attorney Sterling. She looked tired. She held a cheap plastic pen, staring at the open case files like she had seen this exact family garbage 1,000 times before. Robert's lawyer started the circus. He leaned back, interlacing his fingers. The expensive leather chairs squeaked loudly in the cold room. He cleared his throat and started talking about high emotions and regrettable family misunderstandings. He used the word miscommunication 3 times. Rachel Hayes let him speak for exactly 30 seconds. Rachel stood up. She did not look at Robert. She did not look at his overpriced lawyer. She locked her eyes directly onto ADA Sterling. Miscommunication is when you forget to call on a birthday, Rachel said, her voice flat, cutting through the freezing room. What we have here is a documented timeline of a felony. She began firing the artillery. She slammed a thick manila folder onto the table. May 12th. The defendant calls a real estate broker and explicitly claims sole ownership of the property. May 15th, he lies to the broker and signs a legal affidavit confirming that lie. May 18th, he attempts to forge a signature to finalize a cash sale. And finally, yesterday morning, when the escrow account is frozen due to his fraud, he gets blackout drunk, attempts to break down my client's door, and physically assaults a Colorado Springs police officer. Robert's face turned a violent shade of purple. His lawyer raised a hand, trying to interrupt the barrage. "Hold on, let us be reasonable," the lawyer said, forcing a calm tone. "The real estate issue is a messy civil dispute over a shared marital asset. It belongs in civil court. My client was under the impression he had the legal right to sell." Suddenly, the silence broke. A pathetic, wet sob echoed across the oak table. "Carol." She grabbed a tissue, dabbing her eyes, playing her favorite role. The suffering peacemaker. "He was just under so much pressure from the debt," she cried, looking at ADA Sterling, begging for sympathy. "We were going to lose everything. He just made a mistake. Please do not ruin his life over a house." I watched my mother cry. I felt absolutely nothing. Rachel smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a thin, predatory line across her face. She reached into her battered leather briefcase. She pulled out the crisp certified copy of Frank Mason's will. She placed her hand flat on the document and pushed it hard across the polished oak table. The thick paper slid with a dry, harsh scratching sound. It moved like a torpedo, stopping dead right in front of Robert's trembling hands. Ada Sterling picked up her copy. She adjusted her glasses and read the highlighted text aloud. Her voice was completely devoid of emotion. "Carol Vance retains only a life estate. She's strictly forbidden from selling or transferring the property. Absolute ownership belongs to Sarah Mason." The oxygen left Robert's lungs. He stared at the signature on the paper. He started shaking his head. He looked at his lawyer. He looked at my mother. "Fake!" Robert stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified child. "This is a fake. A forgery. He never wrote that." Rachel leaned over the table, resting her knuckles on the wood. She delivered the final crushing blow. "The original was recovered this morning via subpoena from the old law firm of Miller and Hayes," Rachel stated. "It was filed and notarized 10 years ago. Furthermore, the living witness to that document, Sergeant O'Connor, is sitting right outside in the hallway." Every single escape route slammed shut. The concrete poured over the exits. Carol collapsed forward. Her forehead practically hit the polished oak. She buried her face in her hands. A loud, ugly, pathetic wail ripped out of her throat. It shattered the cold, clinical silence of the room. She was not crying out of regret. She was not crying because she betrayed her only daughter. She was crying because the heavy, disgusting truth of her complicity was just dragged out into the harsh, fluorescent light of a government building. She knew about the will. She hid it. Now the law was looking right at her. ADA Sterling dropped her cheap plastic pen. It hit the table with a sharp crack. She looked at Robert with the dead, tired eyes of an executioner. "You have 2 options, Mr. Vance," Sterling said, completely ignoring the crying woman. "You sign the plea deal for felony fraud right now. You accept the probation, the heavy fines, and the permanent criminal record. Or you walk out that door, we go to criminal court, and I promise you we'll wear a bright orange jumpsuit for the next 3 to 5 years. Robert broke. His broad shoulders caved in. He slumped forward in the expensive leather chair, staring blankly at the floor. He nodded once. Defeated. The battle was officially over. I stood up. I did not say a word to the man who tried to steal my father's legacy. I did not look at the woman who gave birth to me. I turned my back and walked out of the freezing room. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The cold Colorado air hit my face. I looked up at the solid gray sky. The predator was dead, but the rot was still there. I zipped up my jacket, preparing for the final cut. The heavy wooden gavel cracked against the solid mahogany block. The sound echoed loud and hollow across the vast empty courtroom. The sentence came down hard, fast, and without a single ounce of mercy. 3 years of supervised probation. A permanent zero-tolerance restraining order. Robert walked out of those heavy brass-handled double doors with absolutely nothing left to his name. He was legally forced to liquidate his precious glossy black BMW just to cover my extensive attorney fees. He looked small. He looked like a pathetic, broke old man wearing a wrinkled, oversized suit. I watched him shuffle down the polished marble hallway. I did not smile. I did not pump my fist in the air. There was no grand cinematic moment of triumph. I just felt tired. A heavy, crushing exhaustion settled deep into my bones. Litigation fatigue is a real physical weight. It grinds you down to the absolute marrow. Beating your own family in a court of law does not bring joy. It just brings survival. Sometimes a victory looks and feels exactly like an open, bleeding wound. 1 week later. The legal dust had finally settled. I sat on the edge of my stiff military cot, lacing up my heavy combat boots. My cell phone vibrated violently against the metal frame of the bed. The sudden noise grated against my nerves. The bright screen displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times. I picked up the device and pressed the cold glass against my ear. I did not say a single word. I waited. A sharp, shaky breath came through the small speaker. Still no apology. Not a single word of regret for throwing me to the wolves. She fell right back into her favorite comfortable role, the eternal suffering victim. "Are you happy now, Sarah?" she asked. Her voice dripped with bitter, toxic resentment. "This is what you wanted, right?" I gripped the hard plastic edge of the phone until my knuckles turned stark white. My jaw locked tight. She still refused to see the reality of her actions. She chose the parasite over her own blood, and she was angry at me for surviving the execution. My voice came out incredibly dry. It was completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "I am not happy," I told her. "I am just at peace. When you are ready to be an actual mother, you know my number. Until then, do not call me again." I pulled the phone away from my face. I stared directly at the bright red button on the screen. I pressed it hard with my thumb. A short, harsh beep echoed loudly in the quiet room. The line went dead. The surgical removal of the tumor was officially complete. I blocked her phone number permanently. Saturday morning. I drove my beat-up Jeep straight up into the high elevation of the Rocky Mountains. The air grew thin and biting cold. The heavy pine trees cast long dark shadows over the winding dirt road. The wooden cabin stood exactly where it always did, quiet and solid against the tree line. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The air inside felt stale, tainted. I walked through the living room and through every single window, wide open. The freezing mountain wind rushed inside, sweeping out the lingering, disgusting smell of cheap cologne and decades of lies. I brought in a thick stack of flat cardboard boxes from the trunk of my Jeep. I snapped them open. I did not move with anger. I moved with cold, mechanical efficiency. I walked through the rooms and systematically erased their existence. I grabbed Robert's cheap ceramic statues, his old golf magazines, his heavily stained coffee mugs. I grabbed my mother's decorative pillows and her faded curtains. I did not smash anything. Breaking things required emotion. I had absolutely none left to give them. I shoved everything deep into the cardboard boxes. I pulled a heavy roll of packing tape and ripped it viciously across the cardboard flaps. The harsh, tearing sound of the adhesive echoed off the wooden walls. I carried the heavy boxes out to the detached shed in the backyard and dumped them in the dark. I walked back inside the cabin. Small dust motes drifted in the sharp shafts of sunlight cutting through the open windows. The cabin was completely empty of their infection. I gave the sanctuary back to my father. At 4 in the afternoon, a heavy work truck crunched onto the gravel driveway. The locksmith. He was a quiet, thick-shouldered guy wearing a faded canvas jacket. He did not ask any questions. For a solid hour, the only sound in the house was the metallic clicking of his screwdriver and the heavy thud of a hammer. He stripped every single old lock out of the wooden doors. He replaced them all with heavy-duty reinforced steel cores. I stood on the front wooden porch. The sun began to dip behind the jagged Colorado peaks, setting the sky on fire in brilliant, violent shades of orange and bruised purple. The bitter mountain wind whipped across my face, stinging my cheeks. The locksmith walked out and handed me a heavy metal ring. The new keys were solid brass. They felt freezing cold against my calloused palm. I walked up to the heavy front door. I slid the brass key into the brand new cylinder. I turned it to the right. Clack. The solid steel deadbolt drove deep into the reinforced frame with a heavy, satisfying thud. It sounded exactly like a bank vault locking down. The fortress was absolutely secure. One door closed forever. A completely new life was waiting on the other side. 4 months later. The thick white smoke from the charcoal grill drifted across the wooden porch. It smelled like burning pine rendered beef fat and sweet, heavy hickory sauce. I stood near the dented, soot-covered iron smoker, flipping thick cuts of brisket with a pair of long steel tongs. The fat sizzled loudly, hitting the glowing orange coals. There was no blood family on this mountain, no crying mother, no manipulative sister, just my real people. Sarge O'Connor sat in my father's old wooden rocking chair. He was laughing, his gravelly voice echoing off the solid timber walls. Rachel Hayes leaned against the porch railing. She traded her expensive Denver courtroom suits for worn denim jeans and a heavy flannel shirt. A group of local combat veterans stood around the fire pit drinking cheap beer out of crushed aluminum cans, trading deployment stories. Rachel cracked the seal on a heavy glass bottle. Macallan, 18 years old. She poured the dark amber liquid into thick glass tumblers. She passed them around the circle. She stopped, turned toward the grill, and raised her glass high into the cold mountain air. "To Captain Mason," Rachel said. Her voice cut clearly through the loud chatter. "The woman who taught us all exactly how to hold the high ground." I raised my own glass. The whiskey burned hot and clean down the back of my throat. I looked at the faces around the fire. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just a biological accident. Loyalty makes a family. Getting in the trenches when the artillery starts falling makes a family. These people stayed. I did not go back to active duty. I filed the paperwork and transitioned into the Army Reserve. The uniform still hung in my closet, but my battlefield changed. I sat at the heavy oak dining table inside the cabin. My encrypted laptop was open. Rachel sat across from me, reviewing thick stacks of legal filings. We were not fighting Robert anymore. We were building an entirely new machine, a non-profit organization. We called it the Citadel Initiative. Every single day, young soldiers deploy overseas to protect this country. And every single day, parasitic spouses, greedy parents, and manipulative family members drain their bank accounts, steal their property, and ruin their credit scores while they are thousands of miles away holding a rifle. Not anymore. Rachel provided the lethal legal firepower. I provided the strict military network. We built a free ironclad legal defense system for deployed service members. We drafted irrevocable trusts. We froze compromised bank accounts. We hunted down every single financial parasite who thought they could steal from a soldier bleeding in the dirt. We took a 19-year-old kid deployed to Syria whose mother sold his truck and drained his savings, and we slammed her with a federal injunction before his boots ever touched American soil again. I took the deep, ugly wound my family carved into my back, and I hammered it into a heavy steel shield to protect others. Late Tuesday afternoon. The sun was dropping behind the jagged peaks, casting long black shadows across the gravel driveway. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I walked over. The screen flashed my mother's name. It was the first time she bypassed the block list, calling from a new unregistered number. I stared at the glowing glass. I did not feel the old spike of adrenaline. I did not feel the heavy, crushing weight in my chest. I felt absolutely nothing. Just a cold, flat calm. I picked it up and pressed answer. Sarah. Her voice was incredibly thin, hollow. The arrogant, manipulative edge was completely gone. She sounded exactly like a broken, exhausted old woman. I heard the faint, muffled sound of highway traffic in the background. I left him, she whispered. Her breath hitched, stalling in the quiet receiver. Robert is gone. I packed 2 bags. I am sleeping on a friend's couch in Denver. She waited. She wanted the emotional rescue. She wanted me to cry, to offer my home, to sweep away the past 10 years of betrayal and play the role of the loving, forgiving daughter. I leaned back against the solid timber pillar of the kitchen. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer her a life raft. Thank you for letting me know, I said. My tone was civil, polite, and completely detached. Take care of yourself, Carol. I hung up the phone. I did not block this new number. A tiny, fragile seed dropped onto the dirt, but it dropped on the far side of a 10-foot razor wire fence. She would have to water it herself. 6 o'clock the next morning. The Colorado air was freezing. Thick, heavy gray fog rolled through the deep valley, swallowing the lower tree line. I walked out onto the front porch. I wore my father's oversized faded wool sweater. The heavy fabric smelled like cedar sawdust and old tobacco. I sat down in the wooden rocking chair. I wrapped both of my bare hands around a thick ceramic mug. The black coffee steamed in the freezing air. Complete silence. No screaming, no gaslighting, no predators waiting in the dark to steal my foundation. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. The dark, hot liquid warmed my chest. I looked out over the sprawling pine forest. The sun broke over the mountain ridge, burning away the gray fog. A red-tailed hawk circled high above the timberline. My father's legacy stood firm against the wind. It was absolutely safe. But as I sat there watching the morning light hit the wooden beams, the hard truth finally settled deep into my bones. The greatest fortress in the world was not made of wood and stone. The greatest fortress was my own mind, and no one would ever breach the walls again. If my story gave you strength, please hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all again very soon.